Hi, my name is Brant Huddleston, and I'll be your guide today on this by Brant video tour of the National Mall and Memorial Parks in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States of America. As a longtime resident of the D.C. area, I am fascinated by the amazing and uniquely American stories behind these stunning memorials, and I'm sure you will be too.
In the next 30 minutes or so, I'll take you to many famous monuments, such as the majestic Lincoln and Jefferson memorials, and also to some of the lesser-known memorials, such as the obscure Waterside Memorial to the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence. Each one is a tribute to the remarkable men and women who believed in a dream of freedom, fought to preserve it, and lived according to its highest ideals. If you are planning to visit the National Mall, then I recommend you use the code on the inside of your DVD packaging to download the by Brant smartphone app, which includes all the same audio you'll hear on this video, plus a map showing you how to get around. Just pop a pair of earbuds into your smartphone and go on tour whenever you want. It's that easy.
The National Mall is open 24 hours a day and is beautiful any time of day or night, especially during the evening hours when these memorials are brilliantly lit. So come on, let's get going.
We find ourselves today at the feet of Thomas Jefferson, a man who at age 33 penned a document that fueled an ongoing revolution that changed the world. That document, of course, was America's Declaration of Independence, which Congress approved on July 4th, 1776, giving voice to America's continuing Revolutionary War with the British Empire. Victory by the 13 former British colonies led to their founding as the United States of America, a sovereign nation. A leader in the Enlightenment movement, which valued reason over tradition or faith, Jefferson was a so-called Renaissance man who spoke 5 languages fluently and was deeply interested in science, invention, architecture, religion, and philosophy. He was a fierce advocate for individual liberty, but only when accompanied by education, having once said, quote, "If a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be," unquote. Jefferson eventually became a U.S. president, its third, but when writing his own epitaph, he ignored that vaunted role, choosing instead to be remembered for 3 things: authoring the Declaration, authoring the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and founding the University of Virginia. Thomas Jefferson died on July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years to the day after the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. Dedicated to Thomas Jefferson, the 3rd President of the U.S., founding father, principal author of the Declaration of Independence, the Thomas Jefferson Memorial is a major Washington, D.C. landmark. Designed by John Russell Pope, the memorial's neoclassical architecture with portico, circular colonnade with ionic columns and shallow dome resembles the Pantheon of Rome. The interior features a 19-foot, or nearly 6-meter, 10,000-pound bronze statue of Jefferson gazing toward the White House, and walls engraved with his writings. The frieze below the dome contains an excerpt in which he defends the constitutional refusal to recognize a state religion. The southwest panel includes excerpts from the Declaration of Independence. All are well worth taking a moment to read. This memorial was built during the tumultuous years of World War II in the 1940s, and with controversy, as some believed such elaborate public buildings should not be constructed during times of national hardship. But built it was, and today we have it with which to remember and honor the genius and vision of Thomas Jefferson. George Washington was the first president of the United States from 1789 to 1797, the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War, and one of the founding fathers of the United States. He is one of the truly recognizable and revered figures from American history. His picture is on the U.S. $1 bill, and a man about whom there are many fabled stories. In fact, George Washington was born in 1732 into a moderately wealthy colonial family that owned tobacco plantations and slaves in Virginia, where he spent most of his young manhood. His later military accomplishments were mixed. In the American Revolution, Washington managed to force the British out of Boston in 1776, but was defeated and almost captured later that year when he lost New York City. A daring crossing of the Delaware River in the dead of winter, depicted in the famous painting by Emanuel Leutze, led to British defeat in 2 battles. But more often, Washington was outmaneuvered by British generals with larger armies. Victors, however, get to write history, not the vanquished, and today, Washington's legacy as a military man, statesman, and gentleman remain among the genuinely great in American history. Washington had a clear vision for the young United States, that of a great and powerful nation that would use federal powers to advance the ideals of a republic, that is, a government in which the affairs of the state are a public matter and not just the private concern of its rulers. In other words, Washington was against any form of government where the privileged and powerful 1% make decisions for the 99%. In his farewell address, George Washington warned against partisanship, sectionalism, and involvement in foreign wars, warnings that too often go unheeded by today's politicians. After retiring from the presidency in 1797, after 2 terms in office, Washington returned to his home in Mount Vernon, Virginia, where he became a gentleman farmer, growing hemp and cooking up his own whiskey without permit, acts which are illegal in the U.S. today. He freed all his slaves by his final will. At his death in 1799, Washington was eulogized as first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. This iconic landmark, the world's tallest freestanding stone structure and the world's tallest obelisk, was built between 1848 and 1884 as a tribute to General George Washington, the United States' first president and a man hailed as the father of his country. Rising 555 feet and 5 1/8 inches tall, or about 169 meters, and weighing 81,120 tons, the marble, bluestone gneiss, and granite structure make the Washington Monument Washington, D.C.'s tallest building. The original design by architect Robert Mills called for the base of the obelisk to be surrounded with a circular colonnade, the top of which would feature George Washington standing in a chariot. Mills believed omitting the colonnade would make the towering monument look like a stalk of asparagus. But in those days, the U.S. could only do things when it actually had the money to pay for them, and so the colonnade was never built. Notice a difference in the shading of the marble nearly a third of the way up, showing where construction was halted for a number of years when building funds ran too low by 1854. A rare 5.8 magnitude earthquake struck the Washington area on August 23, 2011, causing some damage to the monument that has since been repaired. When open, you may take the elevator to the top and see on the descent some of the 193 commemorative stones donated by numerous organizations from all over the country and the world. I have not yet begun to fight. Those immortal words are a famous refusal to surrender given by Commander John Paul Jones, a father of the Continental Navy, during a fierce battle with the Royal Navy in 1779. A battle Jones eventually won. Not to be mistaken for a man of the same name who played bass guitar for the rock band Led Zeppelin, the John Paul Jones depicted here is the only naval officer to earn the Congressional Gold Medal during the Revolutionary War. This tribute memorial, created by sculptor Charles Henry Niehaus and architect Thomas Hastings, was the first memorial dedicated in West Potomac Park in 1912. Look for the relief at the base of the monument depicting Jones raising the U.S. flag over his ship, the Bonhomme Richard, a scene believed to be the first time the U.S. flag was raised on an American warship. Few events in U.S. history are more important to the American people than the day in July 1776, when 56 men came together to adopt a document declaring the reasons for the young colony's independence from the British Empire. It is a day that not only defined the United States as we know it today, but arguably changed the course of all human history. Signing the Declaration of Independence was considered treason and involved grave risks for all who put their names to the paper. But the men were undaunted. William Ellery, a delegate from Rhode Island, wrote after signing, "I was determined to see how they all looked as they signed what might be their death warrants. I placed myself beside the secretary, Charles Thompson, and eyed each closely as he affixed his name to the document. Undaunted resolution was displayed on every countenance. The event is celebrated every year with great fanfare on July 4th, the day known as Independence Day. This humble memorial is in recognition of the 56 men who dared to make that day and a great nation possible. Who would think that tucked away in this obscure corner of the National Mall we would find one of the great champions of civil rights? But here he is, George Mason, the father of the United States Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution that guarantee to Americans such rights as the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and a free press, freedom from unreasonable search and seizure, and the right to keep and bear arms. Many of these rights are being challenged today in the age of terrorism as Americans struggle to find the right balance between freedom and security. But we have George Mason to thank for them as an American ideal to preserve. While one of America's founding fathers, you won't find George Mason's name on the U.S. Constitution because he refused to sign it, as it did not abolish slavery and lacked necessary protection from the federal government for the individual. On the issue of slavery, Mason found it morally objectionable and called it a slow poison. But like many men of his day, he actually owned slaves, quite a few in fact. His vision for America, however, was for slavery's eventual abolishment, and he advocated a ban on further importation of slaves from Africa and for laws to prevent its spreading to states where it didn't already exist. The George Mason Memorial, among the lesser-known sites in D.C., features concentric circles around a fountain and a bronze Mason relaxing on a bench beside books by Cicero, a Roman philosopher and statesman. 2 nearby stone slabs contain Mason's words rejecting slavery. Designed by sculptor Wendy M. Ross and landscape architect Fay B. Harwell, the memorial was dedicated in 2002. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States, serving from March 1861 until his assassination in April 1865. He successfully led his country through what some consider its greatest constitutional, military, and moral crisis, the American Civil War. Raised in poverty and self-educated, Lincoln was a failure in business, openly ridiculed by his colleagues, henpecked by his wife, and often derided as a poor leader. The Civil War, by far the nation's bloodiest, is still controversial, but Lincoln has been consistently ranked by scholars and the public as one of the 3 top U.S. presidents. He is much loved for his clear vision, unshakable resolve, profound dignity, common sense, and brilliant wit, virtues rarely found in U.S. politicians today. When an assassin, incensed by Lincoln's advocacy of voting rights for blacks, shot the president in the head, the nation sensed they had lost a great man, and they mourned. Now he belongs to the ages, it was said of him upon death, and so today Lincoln also belongs to all of you. President Lincoln's 175-ton, 19-foot or 5.8-meter-high marble statue, designed by Daniel Chester French, is meant to inspire hope and faith during times of adversity. This chamber also contains the full text of Lincoln's famously short but powerful Gettysburg Address, in which he honored the nearly 3,500 Union soldiers that perished over 3 days in that terrible Civil War battle. Take a moment to read it, as it is a poignant glimpse into the soul of the man many love and remember as Honest Abe. This prominent neoclassical monument honors Abraham Lincoln, the 16th U.S. President, who preserved the Union during the Civil War, abolished slavery, and promoted economic and financial modernization. The Doric Temple, designed by architect Henry Bacon, stands 190 feet or 58 meters long, 118 feet or 36 meters wide, and almost 98 feet or 30 meters high. It is encircled with 36 columns, one for each state in the United States, at the time of Lincoln's assassination in 1865. When the memorial was completed in 1922, the U.S. included 12 new states, so all 48 states were carved on the outside of the memorial's wall. A plaque with 2 even newer states, Alaska and Hawaii, was added later. The Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool was designed by Henry Bacon and completed in 1924 following the dedication of the Lincoln Memorial in 1922. It holds approximately 6,750,000 U.S. gallons, or 25,500,000 liters of water. The pool is approximately 2,029 feet, or 618 meters long, over a third of a mile, and 167 feet, or 51 meters, wide. It has a depth of approximately 18 inches, or 46 centimeters, on the sides and 30 inches, or 76 centimeters, in the center. Today, consider reflecting on the pool in this way. Imagine that each inch of water, or 2.5 centimeters, equals 22,000 deaths of those killed by war in uniform. By that measure, the pool's water would equal all 400,000 American soldiers and sailors killed in World War II. In comparison, the 10 million Soviet war deaths from World War II would equal a depth of over 11 meters, or as high as the surrounding trees. American war deaths from the Civil War would be waist-high, and American deaths from the Iraq War would equal 0.2 of an inch, or 5 millimeters, barely enough to wet the bottom. But also consider this. If a single drop of that water represented one of your beloved, then it would surely be as deep as the ocean. The World War II Memorial was built to honor the spirit, sacrifice, and commitment of the American people during a war that touched nearly every corner of the earth, left an indelible mark on the American psyche, and changed history forever. While the war lasted for just 4 years, from 1941 to 1945, it engaged all Americans in struggle and sacrifice, including 16 million men and women who served in uniform and more than 40,000 who gave their lives. The two large pavilions on either end of the memorial's plaza represent the two major battle theaters in which the U.S. Armed Forces were engaged. The Atlantic refers to the fight against Nazi Germany, and the Pacific refers to the fight with Imperial Japan. As you walk toward either of the pavilions, make note of the 24 bas reliefs set into the walls depicting various war scenes, such as servicemen receiving physical exams and being issued military gear, a handshake between the American and Soviet armies, and the celebrated homecoming at the war's end. Surrounding the plaza are 56 granite pillars, each one inscribed with the name of one of the U.S. states or territories that contributed sons and daughters, flesh and blood, to the great struggle. The Freedom Wall shows 4,048 gold stars, each of which represents 100 Americans who died or remain unaccounted for in the war. These people grew up in the United States during the deprivation of the Great Depression, and then fought and died not just for their country, but also because they believed it was the right thing to do. For their efforts, they and their surviving countrymen are referred to as America's greatest generation. America's 32nd president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, led the country through the dark years of the Great Depression in the 1930s and into the final years of World War II. He is recognized as being among America's greatest presidents and is well known by Americans as FDR, or by his contemporaries as simply the President. For them, there was no other. FDR is the only president to be elected for an unprecedented 4 terms, a tenure made impossible by constitutional amendment ratified after his death. FDR died in office before completing his final term. Left unfinished at the time of President Roosevelt's death was a world at war and a U.S. economy still shaky from the Great Depression. FDR's economic revival plan, called the New Deal, is today still controversial. Some economists believe it saved the nation from even greater disaster, and it is arguably a blueprint for President Obama's rescue plans for the Great Recession of 2008. Other economists argue that the New Deal unnecessarily prolonged the U.S. Depression. Whatever your view, we have this massive memorial to honor and remember a great American leader and president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. While still alive and sitting in his Oval Office at the White House, FDR specifically asked that if a memorial were to be made for him, that it be modest in nature and about the size of his desk. His wish was granted, and for 30 years, FDR's only memorial was a simple granite block you can still see on the corner of 9th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue. But all that changed in 1997 with the opening of this official memorial to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Designed by architect Lawrence Halprin, This expansive 5-room memorial represents FDR's 12 years in office from 1933 to 1945 and is landscaped with granite walls, statuary, inscriptions, waterfalls, and thousands of plants, shrubs, and trees. It is the first memorial to be made wheelchair accessible, a reflection of Roosevelt's polio and partial paralysis. Here you find designer George Segal's statue of a man listening to one of Roosevelt's famous fireside chats, by which the president reassured and bolstered anxious Americans during the 1930s, a decade known for the massive unemployment of the Great Depression, the agricultural ravages of the Dust Bowl, and a looming European war.
So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
The Rural Couple and the Breadline, also by George Segal, show America at the height of this time of great hardship. Further along, you encounter a 5-paneled mural and pillars representing elements of FDR's New Deal, a program designed to relieve unemployment and stimulate economic recovery. This statue of Roosevelt sitting in his wheelchair was added in 2001, several years after the opening of the monument in 1997, and was the result of controversy. Because Roosevelt hid his disability from the public while in office, the memorial's designer believed the memorial should do the same, and that if FDR were alive, he would be mortified to be shown any other way than able-bodied. Proponents of the wheelchair statue countered with the winning argument that this statue shows how all human beings, regardless of their disability, have the opportunity to reach their highest potential. Judging by the number of disabled persons who pose with the statue, the winning argument proved to be right. Here we have a statue of FDR's wife Eleanor Roosevelt, one of the great women of history, standing beside the United Nations emblem. Author, speaker, politician, activist, and feminist, she is considered the most influential member of the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. Eleanor Roosevelt's relationship with FDR was complex, troubled at times by his extramarital philandering, the details of which are today still unclear. Though widely respected in her later years, she was in her time considered a controversial First Lady for her outspokenness, particularly for her progressive stand on racial issues. Mrs. Roosevelt was the first presidential spouse to hold press conferences, write a syndicated newspaper column, and speak at a national convention. On a few occasions, she publicly disagreed with her husband's policies. But undaunted by FDR's immense popularity and bigger-than-life personality, Eleanor Roosevelt set a bold precedent for future First Ladies and a courageous example for all women. Among the waterfalls and FDR quotes carved in stone is this official statue of President Roosevelt. Note his wheelchair is only partly revealed, a design that honors FDR's highly controlled public image and desire not to be shown as physically disabled. While Mr. Roosevelt would occasionally mention the heavy braces of steel that kept him standing, there existed in those days an unofficial courtesy between the president and the press that kept some things out of the public eye, allowing FDR and other presidents certain privileges and infidelities. That courtesy, of course, is long gone today, a harsh truth well understood by FDR admirer and former U.S. President Bill Clinton. Note also to the left of the statue FDR's beloved dog Fala, faithfully standing by the president's side in perpetuity as he did in life. One of the most famous presidential pets, Fala captured the attention of the American public and followed Roosevelt everywhere, performing tricks to the amusement of a heavily burdened nation and becoming part of FDR's overwhelmingly positive public image. Fala survived Roosevelt by 7 years and is buried alongside him, a good dog. The Korean War was fought by 1.5 million American troops between 1950 and 1953 at a cost of over 38,000 American lives. Often called the Forgotten War due to its place in history between the well-known World War II and the Vietnam War, the Korean War was America's first major conflict in its long-standing effort to contain the advance of communism. Some would argue that the U.S. government still maintains such a containment policy to justify its overwhelming military power and role as the world's policeman. But today, terrorism has replaced communism as the scary boogeyman to be contained. Note the wall containing the phrase, "Freedom is not free." a statement underscoring the American belief that sacrifice is always necessary to guarantee liberty. The memorial has two parts which work together: the body of men moving through juniper bushes and the reflecting wall. The group includes 19 stainless steel sculptures of soldiers, their wind-blown ponchos a reminder of Korea's bitter cold and harsh weather. The juniper bushes correspond to the rough Korean terrain. When these sculptures, designed by Frank Gaylord, reflect on the granite wall, the number of soldiers doubles to 38, representing the 38th parallel, a line which divides North and South Korea even today, and which is considered one of the most dangerous places on Earth. The wall, designed by Lewis Nelson, contains actual photographic images sandblasted into the stone, along with the tragic casualty statistics. A granite curb on the north side of the memorial lists the 22 countries that sent troops or gave medical support in America's forgotten war. The Vietnam War was a long, costly, and controversial war that claimed over 1 million lives, including over 58,000 Americans, and threw the U.S. into civil strife. In an attempt to quell the war's controversy, the sole purpose of the Vietnam Veteran Memorial was to honor the soldiers. It recognizes the service members of the U.S. Armed Forces who fought in the war, those who died in service in Vietnam, and those who remain unaccounted for. Designed by Maya Lin, the black granite 246 feet and 9-inch long wall is inscribed with the names of Americans killed or missing in action from Vietnam. The wall's reflective surface bridges the past with the present, which is you. As you walk along the wall, notice the increasing wall height that cuts deeper into the ground and conveys the growing number of fatalities. Completed in 1982, the wall listed 58,191 names, but the number grows as new casualties become known even to this day. This bronze statue, called the Three Servicemen statue, resulted from disapproval over Maya Lin's design of the long black wall, which was deemed by many veterans and congressmen as too abstract and grim, and which, in their opinion, did not reveal a soldier's heroism. This bronze and more traditional sculpture was designed by Frederick Hart and added to the memorial site in 1984, 2 years after the wall's completion. The three young men shown here, a Caucasian, a Hispanic, and an African American, represent the diversity of the U.S. Armed Forces. The weapons they carry depict strength. The Vietnam Women's Memorial marks the first time in American history that a memorial honoring women's patriotic service was dedicated in the nation's capital. About 11,500 American women served in Vietnam, nearly 90% of them as medical personnel. Former Army nurse Diane Carlson Evans believed the valiant service of these women was ignored by the Vietnam Memorial Wall, and so she founded the Vietnam Women's Memorial Project in 1984 and commissioned sculptor Glenna Goodacre to design the statue of three women nursing a dying soldier taking his final breath in their caring hands. The memorial recognizes the women who tended to the sick and dying and reminds grieving families of the comfort women provided their soldiers. The tidal basin, a man-made reservoir, is famous for being the focal point of the National Cherry Blossom Festival held each spring. The trees you are standing under now ring the basin and are smothered in delicate pink blossoms in March or April, depending on the weather. The trees were donated in 1912 by the then mayor of Tokyo, Japan, in an effort to enhance the growing friendship between the United States and Japan, and also to celebrate the continued close relationship between the two nations. 30 years later, the two countries would be locked in a brutal war. But the trees do not know that, so they keep blooming every year. The basin covers an area of about 107 acres, or 43 hectares, and is 10 feet, or about 3 meters, deep. The Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial was built in honor of its namesake, an inspirational African-American orator and clergyman, and then activist for civil rights and peace through nonviolence. Dr. King is considered by many to be a beacon of freedom, equality, justice, and love. Dedicated in 2011, the memorial uses landscaping to convey the fundamental themes of Dr. King's life: justice, democracy, hope, and love. Its location on Independence Avenue was chosen as a direct link to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and is within eyesight of his famous I Have a Dream speech, given at the Lincoln Memorial Steps. The memorial overlooks the cherry trees that bloomed near the anniversary of Dr. King's tragic and untimely death by assassin in 1968. The memorial's centerpiece is a 30-foot-high pink granite relief of Martin Luther King, named the Stone of Hope. This statue is based on Dr. King's famous I Have a Dream speech and symbolizes his personal struggle and the struggle of all oppressed people who pass through a mountain of despair to reach a stone of hope. Note the 450-foot-long wall, including 14 excerpts from Dr. King's sermons and speeches. The earliest dates from the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott in Alabama, and the latest is from his final sermon delivered in 1968 at the Washington National Cathedral, just 4 days before his assassination. The water of the tidal basin represents the life-giving part of King's ideals. The fast-growing flowering tree evokes his ideas of endurance and faith. Thanks again for joining me on today's video tour of the National Mall and Memorial Parks located in Washington, D.C. Today we've learned some of the history of a great nation and its people, the controversies surrounding their accomplishments, and the stories by which we remember them. It's been fun. Don't forget to use the code on the inside of your DVD packaging to download your free tour app, which includes all the same audio you've heard today, plus a map showing you how to find each memorial. Finally, please look for other By Brandt audio tours for your mobile device, and I'll see you on the road.